Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Odin's movie blog. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. And today we'll be talking about the comparison between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, which is exactly what the mainstream show media does not want us talking about for some odd reason. And I think the reason why is because they don't want to talk about how The Rise of Skywalker, even though it is performing well, I broke that down yesterday on the channel, also on the Geeks and Gamers channel as well, where the film is definitely on pace to make at the very least $1 billion and more likely getting closer to that $1.2 billion range. But it still is actually coming in much further behind The Last Jedi than I think some people want to actually admit to. So let's go back in time a little bit to The Last Jedi's coverage by our boys, Scotty Boy Mendelson and Forbes.com. As you can see, this article is more than 2 years old because this was covering where The Last Jedi was after 12 days of release, the international numbers. And what I found from looking at this article was that 12 days after release, so again, just going up to 12 whole days after release, the film had reached $844 million, which was behind the $1.2 billion that had been made by The Force Awakens at this same point in history. So showing us kind of a very similar trend where The Last Jedi made less than The Force Awakens, and guess what? The Rise of Skywalker is making less than The Last Jedi, which a lot of us had expected. So those 12 days, $844 million. Well, let's go ahead to another Deadline article here covering the same time span. So as you can see here, globally after 12 days, it has reached $724 million. Now, they're going to try and spin it saying, oh, look, it's only 5% behind The Last Jedi internationally. But they don't want to talk about how it's actually $120 million behind The Last Jedi internationally. Again, $724 million after 12 days versus the $844 million by The Last Jedi after 12 days. So just doing a quick little math on that, that's $120 million. And let us not forget here that when we're doing our comparisons, our day-to-day comparisons, The Last Jedi is today in history, 2 years ago, about to hit its Christmas bump. So remember that The Last Jedi actually had its Christmas Eve on this Sunday, which is one of the reasons why the Sunday was so much lower than the Saturday and Friday of its original release. But now it's about to hit the Christmas Day and day after Christmas numbers, which, as we all know, was a very strong showing for The Rise of Skywalker, where even itself made $32 million on Christmas and Christmas Eve, respectively. So it did very, very strong, but this is the numbers that we're about to get for The Last Jedi, meaning if these calculations are correct, and if these numbers and these drops continue to hold for The Rise of Skywalker, we'll likely end up seeing The Last Jedi continue to pull away as being the more profitable movie, and also will pretty much make it impossible for The Rise of Skywalker to ever really catch up to it, meaning the film is definitely going to be coming in under the $1.3 billion, which would seem to go in line with the current projections that I have over on OMBReviews.com. So what you see right here, again, $844 million versus the $724 million, 5% behind according to them. But what does that actually result in? $120 million behind. And as I said before, we're going to go ahead and pull up the Excel sheet, the good old Excel sheet, because again, it's important for us to get this perspective. So $724 million for this current film, The Rise of Skywalker, meaning it's minimum going to make $1.035 billion, max of 1.4, but the average of that is 1.2. That seems to be in line with what we're talking about here. If The Rise of Skywalker continues this trek of tracking behind and less than The Rise of Skywalker, rather less than The Last Jedi, and that seems to be still happening, and the fact that it's still $120 million, internationally behind. We can talk about how the film could potentially get close to the domestic entire total made by The Last Jedi, domestically speaking. That is something that a lot of people and a lot of these articles are talking about is, oh, well, don't worry, because domestically it seems like it's going to catch up. But when you actually break down the comparison, you see, no, it's still about $5 million behind. And with Christmas about to hit for The Last Jedi's numbers, that means it's going to probably become a little bit higher than that. It's probably going to be much more than the $5 million that it once was originally. Now, even though the Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday of this week might be very strong still over The Rise of Skywalker, we need to keep in mind the numbers here, because even though the percentage drop from week 1 to week 2 for The Rise of Skywalker was much less, again 59% versus the 67.5% for The Last Jedi, we need to kind of understand the historical context of those numbers. Remember, one of the many reasons why the number was such a tremendous drop was not just because the film was bad, again, we know this, but also that Christmas Eve number on Sunday, I think, really hurt that weekend total, making it as high as it actually was. When you compare that to The Rise of Skywalker, yeah, it had a very strong second weekend with 26 and 25, but then also still lost a lot of money on Sunday as well. So what is this all indicating? This is all indicating that The Rise of Skywalker will continue to trail behind The Last Jedi, and that it will likely top out at $1.2 billion max, and has a very good chance of coming in even lower than that, even though I've pretty much given up on the film not reaching it's going to reach $1 billion. There's just no other way to spin that. There is still a chance that this film can come in at least $100 million less than The Last Jedi, seeing that as of right now, it is $120 million under what The Last Jedi was. So if that number holds, if that differential, that $120 million number holds, that means that this film will come in around 1.2 or possibly $1.1 billion. And if that margin widens, because I honestly think that what we'll find by the end of its run is that The Last Jedi will have kicked its ass in the international marketplace versus The Rise of Skywalker, and The Rise of Skywalker might have a pretty decent domestic total, getting very close to the $600+ million of The Last Jedi. I think that we're still going to see that differential. I think we're still going to see a film that's going to be the lowest grossing of the Star Wars films made by Disney, of the Disney trilogy, and that it's going to really show, hopefully, Disney, that they're beginning to lose their hold on the overall culture. They're beginning to lose their hold on the fan base, because as people like Jeremy Geeks and Gamers and Gary Nerdrotic have been saying, and there's a lot of truth to this movie, The Rise of Skywalker, this should have been endgame numbers. This is the culmination. This is the Rise of Skywalker, the end of the Skywalker saga, the end of the saga that started back in 1977, according to Disney. So you're going to tell me that one of the greatest phenomena in cinematic history is going to end with one of the lowest grosses in that entire history? Like, when you compare those numbers historically to when you adjust for inflation, this number is not going to be one of the highest numbers. This number is not going to be probably even in the top 3 highest grossing films. And the fact that this is the end of the story, this is the end of the saga, and you're going to have a film that's going to underperform in almost every single way. Yeah, you might be able to argue, it's only 5% behind, or it's only $5 billion behind in the domestic totals. But when $120 million is what separates these two movies, and that number is set at this point in time, because I've mentioned the domestic numbers are about to go up a lot higher for where The Last Jedi was at this time in history because of that Christmas bump that this film, The Rise of Skywalker, has already had. I'm sorry, but it just doesn't seem very likely that this film is going to be able to catch or pass up The Last Jedi, and that's just sad. This is a film that should have been easily a $2 billion film, or a $1.5, $1.7 billion film, and it's not likely going to hit those numbers because Disney dropped the ball. They failed epically, and we're going to continue to track that as we go on. And some people might say, hey, Odin, aren't you trying to spin it now? Aren't you trying to, say things that aren't true? Well, again, I'm just looking at the numbers here. I'm looking at the trends, and I'm just comparing 2 articles. Again, from Forbes.com and Deadline, which are, last time I checked and heard from a lot of people in the media, pretty reputable sites. 12 days, 724. 12 days, $844 million. $120 million difference. And that $120 million difference is something that I cannot simply ignore. But let me know your thoughts about this. Do you think that The Rise of Skywalker will be able to make up this $120 million deficit? I honestly think, because the foreign totals aren't really as impressive as what The Last Jedi had at this same point in history. I mean, let's just go back for a second. Let's go and look to the overall totals for The Last Jedi. By the end of its run internationally, it had made $712 million internationally, $620 million domestically. I don't think that The Rise of Skywalker is going to even come close to this number. Remember, it was much lower in China for Rise of Skywalker than it was for Last Jedi. It is lower in almost all the countries across the board now at this time. So yeah, it's still making money, especially when you compare it to other films. But for a Star Wars movie, for a film that's got the Disney machine behind it, it's really not coming in to be that impressive. Yeah, the domestic numbers could very well get very close to this number, maybe between $550 and $600 million. But if the number can't really get to this number, if you're looking at 500, 550 here and 500, 550 here, you're looking at a film that barely breaks $1 billion. And then there's questions of just how much profit will the film actually make. And the film, at this point in time, based on the budget that I have, which some say is too high, some say is too low, which is the reason why I think it's a perfect number, because I think it hits that happy medium. You're looking at a film that doesn't need to make exactly $1 billion to break even, but needs to be pretty close if it wants to make a nice little hefty profit on top of it, which is kind of the point of all these movies. Not to mention the fact that there have been people breaking down the numbers saying that the $4 billion purchase of Lucasfilm by Disney has not even become close to being paid off by these films when you actually take in the raw net gains and net profits. Of course, there's a lot of numbers missing in that, but still, the fact that we're not even at the point of saying this film franchise, this new sequel trilogy has, easily made back their money, is kind of sad when you think about it. Again, these numbers right here being so close, the 361 to 363, should be troubling, I would say, to people at Lucasfilm and the people in the box office industry that are trying to shill for The Rise of Skywalker. Because when you had the same point in history for The Last Jedi's numbers internationally were much higher than it is now. You could say that the domestic market was not too far off. Again, it was only about it was about $5 million off from the domestic market where it was now, but that number is about to increase. And as you can see, the number here for the international marketplace for The Last Jedi has already begun to run away. Again, it's already begun to run away. I really wish that they still had these sites like a Box Office Mojo that used to be able to keep track of the weekend to weekends for all these films, because I would love to see where internationally this film was at the same time. Unfortunately, I'm not really being able to find that at this point in time. But let's see right here. It says $400 million across at the North American box office after those first 12 days, which means that it would be at $444 million internationally at that same point. So $400 million versus 444. Again, you can see those numbers are not quite right. And it's interesting to see how this comes up. And as I said, I think that the international box office is going to be the Achilles heel of this movie. Domestic box office is not going to match what The Last Jedi did, because it's already tracking behind and those numbers are going to continue to drop. But the international number, I think, is going to be what kills it. Anyway, let me know thoughts about that and all things to talk about in the comment section below. If you like this video, smash the like button, give me a subscribe. It helps me out a lot. You're all amazing, beautiful people. Have a wonderful day. And as always, God bless.